Craig Foster is a research specialist at the Family History Library in Salt Lake. He is the author or co-author of 3 books and is the co-editor of the 3-volume Persistence of Polygamy. And it does persist, I understand. John Whitmer Books published this 3-volume set. We were unable to get one of the volumes for tonight, I think, but we have a couple. We'll be able to get the other one later. Of course, tonight, as I showed you, this is the book they'll be focusing on. But Craig has also done, and I don't have them all to show you, but he also did Penny Tracts and Polemics, a critical analysis, he's got it right here, of anti-Mormon pamphleteering in Great Britain. Now I understand that's selling into the dozens. Is that right, Craig?
Selling.
Yeah, I was commenting earlier that actually you ought to buy this because this will be a collector's item someday. They will never do another reprint because it hasn't sold that well. So there's going to be very few out there eventually.
Boy, he knows how to do a sales pitch.
It's that good.
It's that. It hasn't sold very many, so you better get it now. But probably will. There will be a time when we are searching for that book as an out-of-print book, which is one of our specialties. So, but we don't want to rush that day.
Okay.
No. So he did The Persistence of Polygamy with Newell Bringhurst. And we've had Newell here before, had them both speak, as a matter of fact. And Marianne Watson has, and I've known both of these individuals for a long time, respect them very much, and I'm honored to be their friend and advocate, because there's nothing I love more besides my wife and family than books. And so to me, getting information out to those who are interested in it is one of the greatest things I can do in life. And of course, a lot of you have heard me say that, ironically, I say the best way to hide things from the saints is to publish them. Because unfortunately we just don't have enough readers out there and students of history. Marianne is a graduate of the University of Utah in the history department. She was raised as a member of the Apostolic United Brethren. She's been widely published and has spoken at many events, including the Mormon History Association, the Western History Association, and other places. She also was involved with this book, Voices in Harmony, Contemporary Women Celebrate Plural Marriage, along with Mary Batchelor and our very own, I still say our very own, Ann Wild. She worked here for about 87 years or something like that. Oh no, she's not even 87, sorry. Anyway, Ann is an old, no, I'm sorry, not an old dear friend. She's a dear friend who's older than me. Anyway, but she's worked for me for a long time, but she decided that at 80 she ought to retire. What's that about? I mean, anyway, so we can't count on her being here like we used to be able to, but she's here tonight, and I love Ann, and so she's one of the authors of this book that is also available tonight if you're interested in that. Okay, I've gone on long enough, and so let's listen to our authors. Marianne's going to speak first, and then Craig, and then we'd love for you to ask questions, kind of put them on the spot, grill them a little bit, and see if they really know this stuff.
Before I start my paper, I wanted to tell you that this project got started about 12 to 15 years ago when I gave a paper at the Western History Association in Tucson, in Scottsdale actually, it was at Scottsdale, Arizona. And I went to a booth of the publisher, Arcadia Publishing, and I was so impressed with their books. They do histories of places and communities, and mostly photo histories, but they have a history division called History Press that does photos with text. And so I signed up for one of their packets. I was wanted to do this project someday. And about 10 years ago, I got a phone call. They have finally hired a representative in Utah. And he called me up and he said, "Are you still wanting to do a project?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he said, "What is it on?" And I said, "Fundamentalist Mormonism." And he said, he couldn't get off the phone fast enough. He was probably a reacher missionary. I don't know. Anyway, so when Craig and I talked about doing a project together, I told him what my experience had been, and he contacted Arcadia, and they said, "Actually, we are still interested, and are interested in that subject," but their rep had never told them about it. And so we signed a contract about 3.5 years ago, and the result is the book you have today. And they were wonderful, absolutely wonderful to work with. They selected the title, and did we select the subtitle? Or?
We selected the
And we selected the subtitle. So we're very satisfied with the results. I'm going to talk on research surprises that I found on working on while I was doing research for this book. Most authors of history books, I strongly suspect, never include all the details they discover in research. Our book, American Polygamy, has a history of fundamentalist Mormon faith, especially falls in this category due to the parameters, word count limits, and limits on citations provided by our publisher. For me, there were some interesting surprises uncovered in my research. Some of these involved a surprise found in a personal history during that was written during the 1880s, surprises in my own family history, and some surprises involving the family of John W. Woolley, who was a central figure in the development of what became eventually known as the fundamentalist Mormon community. In my family, plural marriage has been practiced in my mother's lineage for 7 generations without cessation. According to some biographers, one of my ancestral great-great-great-aunts, Elizabeth, the wife of James Allred, who lived kitty-corner to Joseph Smith's Nauvoo mansion, delivered messages, even proposals of marriage, to prospective plural wives on behalf of the prophet. James Allred, an early church patriarch, and his brother, my fourth great-grandfather, Isaac Allred, were first-generation Mormons. James and Isaac Allred are buried in the Spring City, Utah cemetery. James' unique monument has 8 7-pointed stars, seemingly a symbolic crown representing his 8 wives. Though Isaac was present when Joseph Smith first presented the revelation on marriage, later known as Doctrine and Covenants, section 132, he does not appear to have married a second wife until 1851, after the death of his first wife in Utah. 3 subsequent generations married plurally with church sanction either before or after the 1890 manifesto, but before the 1904 Second Manifesto. 4 more generations are categorized as fundamentalist Mormons. A surprise was finding contemporary reference by Levi Mather's Savage to the 1882 revelation of President John Taylor. Levi Mather, I think, okay, it's in here. I thought maybe I left it out. So first I'm going to tell you about this surprise concerning Levi Mather's Savage. In 1882, regarding the 1882 revelation of President John Taylor. Levi was the son of Levi Savage, whose role in the Martin and Willie Handcart treks of 1856 was depicted in T.C. Christensen's 2011 film, 17 Miracles. Levi M. Savage had been called to help settle in the territory of Arizona and was living in the soon-to-be-abandoned settlement at Sunset, Arizona, where Wilford Woodruff had received the 1880 revelation 2 years earlier. Savage wrote, "In October 1882, President John Taylor, president of the church, received a revelation from the Lord concerning the filling up of the quorum of the 12 apostles and presidents of 70s. A printed copy of this revelation was sent to me, and I find, reading it, that it speaks very plainly. It says, 'Thus saith the Lord.' We have not had much such plain talk for many years." President Taylor received this revelation October 13, 1882 in Salt Lake City. It named George Teasdale and Heber J. Grant to fill vacancies in the Quorum of 12 Apostles. It also conditionally named Seymour B. Young to fill a vacancy in the presiding Quorum of 70s, if he will conform to my law, referencing plural marriage. For it is not meet that men who will not abide my law shall preside over my priesthood. 2 days later, President Taylor read and discussed the revelation with the first president, 12 apostles, and the presidents of states. President Taylor told Joseph Smith what Joseph Smith had said to him upon that subject, and said, quote, "If we do not embrace that principle soon, the keys will be turned against us, for if we do not keep the same law that our Heavenly Father has, we cannot go with Him. The word of the Lord to us was that if we did not obey the law, that law, we could not go where our Heavenly Father dwelt. A man obeying a lower law is not qualified to preside over those who keep a higher law," end quote. Since most fundamentalists are acquainted with President John Taylor's 1882 revelation, published in a pamphlet titled "The Four Hidden Revelations," Savage's entry was a surprise for me because I had not previously known the revelation had been almost immediately printed after it was received and then distributed to priesthood leaders throughout the church. This opened further research interest in learning more about why Brigham Young men called saints to settle Arizona and New Mexico and Arizona territories between 1876 and 1877, which came as a result of anti-polygamy legislation and growing national anti-polygamy sentiment. Further surprises for me were reading the personal accounts of my great-grandfather regarding the close involvement of church leaders allowing and encouraging plural marriages even at the time of the 1890 Manifesto, as well as after it, prior to the 1904 Second Manifesto. And I'll just briefly state, I'm not going to go into it here, that my great-great-grandfather went to get Wilford Woodruff's permission just before conference in 1890, in October 1890, for taking a third wife. And he was told after they left the meeting that if he would go to Mexico, it could be done. And he did go. And the frank expressions regarding the difficult and traumatic decisions of my great-grandfather, B. Harvey Allred, and his wife to enter plural marriage in 1903. Though I had possessed his written accounts and journals for years, I had never read them until researching for this book. Scrutinizing his writings resulted in a paper I gave the 2018 Mormon History Association in Boise, Idaho, and subsequent revised papers with additional materials presented at 3 meetings in communities of fundamentalist Mormons. The last surprise I am sharing here involves the family of John W. Woolley. John's daughter, Amy Irene Woolley, kept a diary that has been made available by a great-grandson. The bulk of her diary entries are from November 1890, immediately after the Manifesto, until February 1892. What I found of interest in the diary were the many entries telling of visits of church authorities and other prominent leaders to the Woolley home. Also submerged between the lines is the evidence of John's family life that involved his plural wife, Anne Reed Everington, Roberts Nichols Dustin Woolley. She was married 4 times, twice divorced, and widowed once. Anne was the mother of Brigham Henry Roberts, who became quite famous when he was elected to the U.S. Congress, but was not allowed to serve because of his life as a polygamist. Amy makes frequent mention of Mrs. Ann or Mrs. Dunstan, and especially of her stepbrother, B.H. Roberts. It seems quite clear from Amy's less than explicit record that Roberts, among other suitors, was interested in Amy as a potential plural wife. However, Amy had other plans. She determined to marry Thomas Cherry, who her parents did not approve of and forbade her to see. Amy's diary entries abruptly stopped about a month before her mother died, on March 22, 1892. She resumed some brief entries more than a year and a half later, only to report that her father, John Woolley, finally withdrew his objections to her marrying Thomas Cherry. The couple was sealed by Joseph F. Smith in the Salt Lake Temple on 15 November 1893. She and her husband moved permanently to Idaho in 1895. Sparse entries comprise Amy's few remaining diary pages, mostly mentioning the births of her children or important family events, and her Relief Society calling in Idaho. Her last entry was in April 1921, 5 months before she passed away from breast cancer. Amy never mentioned her father's excommunication in 1914, nor any criticism against him or her brother Lorne, who was not excommunicated until 3 years after she died. Another Woolley family surprise to me was when I learned of the posthumous plural wife of John Woolley, Mary Jane Ensign, the daughter of Samuel Ensign and Ruth Kelson, a half-sister of John's first wife, Julia Ensign. Mary Jane died July 20th, 1890 in Salt Lake City, some 6 weeks after giving birth to her last child and only daughter, Mary Jane Ruth Rugg, who subsequently died a year later. Mary Jane had been married to Harry Beaumont Rugg, but had clearly separated from him, as his surname does not appear on her headstone. Records show that Rugg left Utah and went to California. 2 months after John W. Woolley's first wife Julia died in March 1892, Mary Jane was posthumously sealed as his wife, and a little later her children were sealed to him. John brought her 3 boys, Henry, Horace, and Samuel, to live at his Centerville home, along with her grandmother, Ruth Kelson, who legally adopted the boys to avoid potential claims of their birth father. And I suspect that Ruth may have been what some have called a caretaker wife. That John was a caretaker husband, married to her for time only after her husband had died. Her first husband had died, Samuel Ensign. But the reason that I believe that is because in the 1900 census shows Ruth and 2 of the boys living at John's Centerville home, and the 3rd boy living in the bountiful home of John's wife, Anne Everington. Horace, the middle boy, later recalled fond memories of living with John Woolley on his farm, saying those were the best years of his childhood. Before John died in 1928, he named each of the 3 boys in his will. Amy's diary, in a few entries, shortly before her permanent move to Idaho in 1895, mentioned Ruth Kelson Ensign, whom she called Grandma, and Ruth's grandsons, who were then living at her father's Centerville home. These are just a few of the interesting items I enjoyed finding in research for American polygamy that have increased my awareness and generated further curiosity about the faith of the Latter-day Saints as well as fundamentalist Mormons. Thank you.
In Harper Lee's classic novel, To Kill a Mockingbird, Atticus Finch says, quote, "You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view," end quote. As true as this statement was in the Jim Crow South in which this novel is set, it is certainly true today for fundamentalist Mormons. It is often easy for those in mainstream society to ignore, misunderstand, and/or stereotype those who for one reason or another cannot or choose not to conform and fit into majority-held preconceived notions of what is socially acceptable. Fundamentalist Mormons are among those kept at arm's length, and for the most part are neither understood nor accepted by the majority of mainstream society. While there have been books and articles written about fundamentalists and Mormon fundamentalism, Marianne Watson and I agreed there was a need for a general overview history that was more from a fundamentalist point of view than had previously been published. We felt we made a good team. I was born and raised in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and am an active Latter-day Saint. Marianne was born and raised in fundamentalism, specifically the Apostolic United Brethren, also known as the All Red Group. We felt and still believe that our different perspectives would help round out the volume and make it a stronger work. You could say that for better or for worse, the book is kind of an inside-outside look at fundamentalism. Marianne and people she knows had access to some wonderful pictures, many never before published, that we used in the book. But we also needed modern photos, and we both knew who to ask to help us get those pictures. Our dear friend Stephen L. Mayfield, who is known in Mormon history circles for his photographs. Steve happily helped us on this project, and we have had some fun adventures together, traveling to places like Hilldale and Colorado City, Centennial Park, Rocky Ridge, Mount Pleasant, and Rockland Ranch. The information in the book is based on intense research, diaries and correspondence, legal documents, interviews, as well as reviewing multi and social media. Along with Steve Mayfield, we were aided by a number of people willing to share information, documents, and photos with us. Because plural marriage is illegal in all 50 states and is a felony crime in Utah, some of those who assisted us asked not to have their names made public. We respected that request, and that's why in some of the endnotes you'll find where we'll say, uncle of such and such, or a member of the AUB, or things like that, because they definitely did not want their names out there. Like any other religious group, Mormon fundamentalism is not monolithic. There are a number of groups, churches, and independent fundamentalists, all of whom have their histories and doctrinal perspectives, some of which diverge greatly from other fundamentalists. We had the privilege and pleasure of visiting representatives of several of these larger groups, as well as some independents, and are very grateful for their being willing to visit with us. We asked questions and listened to their answers and their stories. An Amazon reviewer stated about our book, quote, I doubt that any of the denominations and groups will be completely happy with this work, which is a testament to its effort to be fair and even-handed, end quote. And that is true. We had very positive feedback. We've had very positive feedback, and others who were not as happy with everything we wrote. But we can honestly say that we tried to approach every group and their members with respect, and truly are grateful that they were willing to share sacred beliefs with us. Among the reasons Marianne and I decided to write this book was to help people to understand and appreciate fundamentalist Mormon history. There were a couple of target audiences as we wrote this. We said, well, you know, some of our readers are going to be this, others are going to be that. The first targeted audience are non-fundamentalists. We realize there are various degrees of knowledge and understanding among this audience, and that the audience is large and diverse. Among these targeted non-fundamentalists are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, many of whom have limited understanding and a good amount of bias regarding their fundamentalist cousins. This book is not a proselytizing work meant to persuade or dissuade. Rather, it is meant to give the information from a fundamentalist point of view with the hope that the different sides might be able to find common ground. We don't have to agree on all things to still have a degree of respect and appreciation for one another. Some of the feedback we have received from members of the Church of Jesus Christ who have read the book has been very positive. Doug Gibson wrote in his review of the book, quote, "The biggest strength of American polygamy is it provides a human face to the sacrifices, suffering, and reappraisals of those who sincerely believe in what is often called the principle. One may never accept polygamy as a principle, but still respect the faith and commitment of those who live a still shunned lifestyle with humility and charity," end quote. Another church member wrote about the book that he, quote, "thought it was a very fair overview of the origins of polygamy, and then later the origins, developments, and eternal and external debates amongst the various fundamentalist groups," end quote. An LDS member and co-worker of mine who had bought the book emailed me and explained that she had started reading the book and literally read it till very, very early in the morning because she could not put it down. That made me feel happy to hear that. But then she added that, quote, "it was really eye-opening to read the entire book and see how the groups have evolved. It was also very moving. I felt that it was a loving and even-handed portrayal of both difficult situations, like Warren Jeffs, and acknowledgement of those who sincerely still live and believe the principle. It makes me even more desirous to see people as people, not as a category. I also love and appreciate our shared heritage with those who also have faith in Christ and a belief in Joseph Smith as a prophet," end quote. Another audience that we hoped to reach are the fundamentalists themselves. Many fundamentalists either do not know their own history or have been misled by a twisted rendering of basic fundamentalist history. And I'm showing my bias here, so I apologize, but a la Warren Jeffs and his teachings, for example.
Our bias too.
About 5 years ago, Newell Bringhurst and I were in the Merry Wives Cafe in Hilldale, down on the border, Hilldale, Colorado City, visiting with a friend from the Centennial Park group. The topic was the wives of Warren Jeffs, their ancestry and relationships. I was trying to get my facts right for my essay that eventually appeared in the third volume of the Persistence of Polygamy series. In the first volume, I had discussed the wives of Joseph Smith, and in the second volume, the wives of the presidents of the church who had had plural wives, so from Brigham Young through Heber J. Grant. And so in the third volume, in a fit of insanity, I decided I'm going to write about the wives of the major fundamentalist leaders. And that was quite the task. So I was trying to check with this friend of ours about some of the known wives of Warren Jeffs. So I asked about their ancestry and relationships, and as we talked, I couldn't help but notice a table with 4 or 5, 6 men in their late teens and early 20s. One man in particular kept watching me as I would give a woman's name, and then we would discuss her parents, grandparents, and ancestry. After a while, as the men all got up from their lunch and made to leave, this one young man approached our table. I wasn't sure what would follow next and prepared myself mentally for whatever might happen here. Of the various scenarios that quickly ran through my head, I did not expect what followed. He asked who we were and what we were doing. we explained we were historians discussing genealogy of different people. I figured let's leave it at the bare minimum here. The young man then said he recognized some of the names of people and he knew he was related to them, but he didn't know how. He explained that he had been kicked out of the FLDS when he was 16. And before that, he and his family had been passed around from one family to another, which had made understanding his family and ancestors even more difficult. He said he wanted to know his ancestors, who they were, and to understand his past. He wanted to basically know who he was. And he asked us, is there anything you can do to help me? What can I do? And we kind of gave him some suggestions, but from there, what could we do? But it was a powerful experience for me. And it reminded me of what Alex Haley once wrote. Quote, "In all of us, there is a hunger, marrow deep, to know our heritage, to know who we are and where we have come from," end quote. This young man, one of the Lost Boys, hungered to know who he really was and where he came from. Now jump forward to July 4th, 2019, just last week. Marianne, Steve Mayfield, and I were in Cottonwood Park, Colorado City, enjoying the festivities and selling our book. Over the course of the couple of days we were there with our table and books, we saw a number of teens and 20-somethings stop and peruse our book. We watched as they looked at the pictures and then excitedly said, "There's my grandpa," or "There's my grandmother," or "My great-grandparents are in here." One lady stopped by and told how she had ordered our book and had already started reading. She said that she, her husband, and kids were driving somewhere, and she was reading the book out loud to her husband. My first thought was, those poor kids. But then she said that when she decided to take a break from reading, it was her kids who asked her to keep reading. They were really interested and wanted to learn more of their history and heritage. A lady stopped to thank us for writing the book and giving people a chance to learn their history. Along those lines, another lady, a 20-something, stopped to tell us she was loving the book. She had seen it in her father's office and picked it up and started reading it. She could barely put it down to do other things. A member of the AUB wrote Marianne that the book helped, quote, "help me to see who was who and why our history ties together with these other groups," end quote. Another member of the AUB wrote, quote, "Often the story of Mormon polygamy is sensationalized and presented with what I have felt was a biased view. Even when difficult subjects are discussed in the book, I felt they were addressed with accurate facts, not speculation or the author's own conclusions," end quote. Another fundamentalist lady wrote about the book, quote, "It is a thorough and honest overview of history that was in danger of being lost had it not been for your diligent research and monumental efforts." Finally, end quote. Finally, a fundamentalist author who we greatly respect wrote, quote, "Hopefully the book will be read by thousands who will benefit from its message," end quote. And I'm sure that Kurt would love to have all of those thousands be sure to buy the book right here at Benchmark Books, so spread the word. But Marianne and I have really appreciated these wonderful messages, and I haven't read them to kind of pat ourselves on the back. It has really helped us realize that hopefully we have made a good effort or a good contribution to the study of fundamentalism. The comments in American Polygamy, A History of Fundamentalist Mormon Faith have really been nice for us to read. Now we realize our book is not the be-all and end-all of fundamentalist history, and we now have a good-sized list of additions and corrections that we would love to make if there is ever a second edition of the book. You know, it never fails. But we've appreciated the feedback where the people have said, wrong identification on that photo, or whatever else. So hopefully, maybe someday, there will be a second edition and we can make those corrections. But we really are happy and humbled to have helpfully helped tell a story desperate to be told and retold. For too long, fundamentalists have been shunted to the shadowlands, forced to live on the fringes of mainstream acceptable society. In the process of living in the shadowlands, many have lost touch with their own history and heritage. We hope that our book will help be a source for those yearning to know their past. In the process, hopefully, of reading this, hopefully stereotypical images of oversexed, chauvinistic men and meek, submissive, downtrodden women forced into a form of slavery, as envisioned by some outsiders, will be broken down. So many on the outside looking in ask how people, especially women, could choose to live such a lifestyle. Historian Ken Driggs commented, quote, "Many of the strongest, most assertive women I have ever met have been fundamentalists. There are always people who fit the stereotypes, but you would be dead wrong if you view fundamentalist women as intimidated victims," end quote. A close observer of fundamentalism wrote, quote, "Many people, especially women, don't understand how several wives can live and work in harmony and at the same time share the affections of one man. The trouble is they don't understand the religion of the polygamous," end quote. And that's really important, that we understand that the reason why they do this is because of their faith, because of their religion. Reflecting such feminine strength and faith, in our conclusion, we write about one young woman who said, and at the time that she said this, she was about 16, barely 16. And before we sent the manuscript to press, I went back and I asked her and her sister, "Do you still believe this? Because if you don't, I'm going to have to rewrite the conclusion." And they both said, "Yes, we do." So she said that she wanted to live plural marriage because it's the celestial law. Both she and her sister agreed that they didn't care if they were the first or a plural wife. But then the first young woman wondered out loud if she truly wanted to be a first wife. Because what if her husband decided after their marriage that he didn't want to live plural marriage? Marrying a single man might be risky, and she emphatically stated she wants to live the principle. Another young woman, resolute on entering plural marriage, told her future mother-in-law, quote, "I don't know what I would do if I could not live this way," end quote. Now these two examples reflect the history of Mormon polygamy, both historical and in modern fundamentalism. These are stories that need to be told. For outsiders looking in on a world they cannot truly understand, and also for fundamentalists hungering to know their past, this is important history. And at times it's not pretty, it's difficult, extremely difficult, but it's a powerful history. And it's because for so many of those in the past, as well as those as their modern day descendants, both literally and spiritually, living the principle of plural marriage is a deep and powerful matter of faith. Thank you. Yes.
You talked about the evolution of fundamentalist belief or practices. What would be evidence of that evolution? What does that mean?
Marianne, you want to answer that?
Will you repeat the
Oh,
question?
okay. So the question was, we talked about the evolution of fundamentalist beliefs and and doctrines, etc. what would that evolution be, and what would that include?
I would not call it an evolution, I would call it a development of the community. It's, for the most part, the evolution comes when things get changed, and I think we've seen a good example of that with Warren Jeffs, completely evolved. But for the majority of fundamentalists, it's holding to the best of their knowledge the original teachings of Joseph Smith, of their ability or of their knowledge.
All right. Other questions?
They know it all.
Yes. Yeah, okay.
Oh, I just wondered how many polygamous groups you spotlight.
We mention,
Repeat it, will you?
oh yes, of course, sorry. How many polygamous groups do we spotlight in the book? We mention various groups, but we really focus on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I think 7 that we, really try to focus on. Yes.
What's the exact name of the book again?
It's American Polygamy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, a history of fundamentalist Mormon faith.
I'll probably be interested again, but not today. I've got another obligation. I just thought I'd drop by and listen to this for a while. So.
All right.
It's been interesting, though. Thank you.
Good. Yeah. Yes.
What does, I think you've partially answered this already, but I'm curious, what this adds to the persistence of polygamy and to Brian Hale's book on modern polygamy that was published, I don't know, 12 years ago?
Yes, Brian's book was published in about 2006, if I remember correctly, somewhere right around there. And Brian goes into detail on a number of the groups, on the origins. The difference would be that we have included some, more updated remarks and information about the groups. We have also included photos that have never previously been published. And there is a bit of a difference in how we approach this as opposed to how Brian approached it. We were trying to tell this as much as possible and still remain neutral from a fundamentalist point of view, and Brian in his book did not. And Brian and I are very good friends, and I really do appreciate the work that he has done, but our approach was a little different in that way.
Maybe I could add to that.
Yes.
Excuse me. Fundamentalists, Mormons, and Brian Hales pretty much agree on the Joseph Smith era, and that he did not have intimacy with the women that were already sealed to other men. So there are a lot of things in the early days that we definitely agree on. Where we differ is the modern practice of polygamy, because naturally he does not support that.
Yes.
I'd just like to say that both of you, as family historians, have brought a dimension to this book that is unparalleled in historical looks at plural marriage. Your two specific ways of life as family historians is awesome.
Thank you. So it was commented that since both of us have a background in family history, that our approach to this book has been different than other books because of our interest in family history. And we did try to tie together some of the early families, the connections and things like that. Did you want to add to that? I'm sure you could, believe me. So.
Well, I wanted to say that in my reading of Brian Hill's stuff, he represents what I believe in, but I don't recognize it as my beliefs. And so, that's the problem. And he also, I don't know how much he tells of his own bias, which we all have a bias. It comes through, and we try to, we have to come through. But he had a sister that married, that was involved in fundamentalism, and so he comes at it to disprove it, to warn, to, you know, that from that point of view. And we are trying to just tell the history of Mormon fundamentalist faith, why people keep doing it.
Yes.
I am just interested to know if, in speaking to these different polygamist groups or fundamentalist groups, did you have to obtain permission by a leader? Did you have easy access to people? And then as a follow-up would be, did you feel people were able to be very open with their faith and their feelings, or did you feel they were somewhat
It varied for my experience, and now, and you may have had a different experience, but in my experience, it varied between the various groups. A couple of them, yes, they definitely had permission from their leadership to talk with us, but I felt that they were fairly open, and they seemed appreciative that we were, you know, trying to do this, and we really did try to be as neutral as possible. As I said, I joked with a couple of people that, well, we have accomplished one thing: we have offended everyone of all the various groups, because you know, we listened to what they had to say. We tried to analyze it, and then tried to write it in a way that we felt that would reflect what they believed, what they had told us. But then we also, based on our other research, we would add other information. And I'm not kidding when I say we offended everyone, because I mean, we even offended some AUB leaders. So, you know, here's Marianne is a part of the AUB, but you know, she because you know, no one wants you know, difficult or embarrassing aspects of their history you know, discussed. But everyone has it. That's the thing. And plus, you know, I accomplished in offending at least one good Latter-day Saint who will be reviewing the book and told me that he didn't like it. So, so yeah, we've really, you know, so we tried to be open with them, and I think that these representatives tried to be open with us, and we really were very appreciative of that, and just to appreciate their trust that we would hopefully, you know, not do a hit job on them. And we definitely did not try to do a hit job on anyone. And we even back and forth, we would talk and say, okay, is this too rough? Should we reword it? Because, you know, we wanted to get the truth out there as much as possible, but we had no axe to grind. So, yes.
Did you approach active members of the FLDS for the book, and how did they respond to the project?
No. Yes. Did we attract? Did we approach active FLDS, and how did they respond? To be honest, for this book, no. It was ex-FLDS that we talked with, but I took from interviews that Newell and I had done, and also that had not ended up in our own book, and so some of those interviews were when Warren Jeffs was allowing representatives to talk with the media. So for the most part, no, but yes, some of it was based on previous interviews. Newell and I did numerous interviews down in Hilldale, Colorado City, and Centennial Park, and so that proved to be very helpful. Did you want to make a comment?
Well, I was inspired by Leonard Arrington years ago in attending a biography writing workshop with him, where he was a class member as well as a speaker, and he told of writing the Woolley book. I can't remember exact thing. Do you remember the name?
Quaker
to Latter-day.
Yeah,
Yes,
Quaker
from
to
Quaker
Latter-day
to Latter-day
Saint.
Saint.
I love that.
And he told how he went and visited with Spencer W. Kibble, whose middle initial is for Woolley, because his mother is a Woolley, and that Spencer did not, he did not direct him. He only encouraged him. He gave him complete latitude to write the book as he saw it. I was approached by a FLDS representative in the 1980s and chided for my public stance and being public and speaking out on polygamy in the 1990s, and he wanted me to go ask permission of the powers that be in the FLDS. Of course, I was not about to do that, and by the same token, I did not approach any leaders of mine to ask permission. I felt that they would support a good work, and the work should speak for itself. And I was not ever requested to get permission either. In fact, we had interviews with a lot of the leaders.
Right. There was one way back there, and then we'll get.
Yeah, I'm a really novice follower of the gal named Jana Reese. I think that's how you say her name. Are you familiar with what she does there?
Yes, Jana Reese, yeah.
So my question is, and I know this probably wasn't the focus of your book, but do you have some kind of impression as to the changes, or are there any changes in the youth in fundamentalism growing up? How many youth are leaving the fundamentalist faith, and how many are staying there and fundamentalizing a different way than the traditional fundamentalists?
I think, and I'm going to give this to you in a moment, Jana she's a great lady. She's done so much really good work. And she's done a great job of tracking the LDS youth. And I think that we agreed that in fundamentalism it would be comparable to the numbers that are leaving the church. But you probably have more to say on that.
I would say it's comparable. Probably 5 to 10 years ago, there was a survey done by youth leaders who concluded that we were losing 50% of our youth, approximately, more or less. And so, but I think that's
the AUB.
Yes, but I think that when we went down to Colorado City this past weekend, we were amazed at seeing the numbers of young girls. There was about a crowd of 5,000 that attended the festivities of the 4th of July there. We were amazed at the number of young girls that were dressed in very short shorts, that were dressed in midriffs, with bare midriffs, and a few of them looked like they were streetwalkers at 13 and 14. And but along with the more conservative dress and clear, and some looked like they were from the 80s, with their more not FLDS with the prairie dresses, but just the conservativeness of the 1980s and before that. And so, but it was Anytown, USA. It was not what you would have seen 25 years ago. It just wasn't. So how do you guesstimate that? But I do think that my sense is that the FLDS, those that are staying, are mostly women about my age and of that generation, in their 50s, 60s, 70s, And I think they're losing a large portion of their youth. Interestingly, a lot of returnees are coming back to the community, but they don't seem to have religion at all. And so some of them are being approached by Christian denominations. What we saw down there was a feeding ground for social do-gooders. And so there were people that gave us our business cards that they said, right on their business card, we, what did it say?
Rescue.
We rescue.
Oh, yes, yes.
You know, and they tell us
Well,
stories
they're
about.
trying to rescue the Mormons too, and the Manti-Page, and they're trying to rescue us to the mainstream.
That's right. And so it's just a different place than it was even 5 years ago. And they started their 4th of July celebrations 5 years ago. They restarted them after a period of 15 years without them. And so there's a renewal in the community, but there's also evidence of complete withdrawal from any kind of religion.
Yes.
As I was talking to you briefly before you began your presentation, I was interested in knowing, it's quite profound, the experience of John Taylor having claimed to have a visit of Joseph Smith and Jesus Christ, advocating the validity of celestial marriage and plural marriage. And then, as I've read just a little bit of your book so far, what was it, 6 presidents of the church in continuity continued to, behind the scenes, advocate to select individuals plural marriage, like the one you just mentioned. It was okay to do it if you went to New Mexico, but what in your research have you found as far as the position of the church still supporting, the 136th section, and that it is a celestial law, and apparently there are some individuals that are given permission to continue to practice polygamy?
Okay. Well, as far as I'm aware, that stopped with Heber J. Grant. Grant came down very hard on post-Second Manifesto or any other type of polygamy, and it would be automatic excommunication. From that time, I am not aware of church presidents secretly telling people it was okay to marry plurally. So if it's happening, it's been a well-kept secret, and that's the reason why I haven't heard anything about that. It was, as far as I'm aware, it was only Wilford Woodruff, Lorenzo Snow, and Joseph F. Smith who gave permission for people to go to Mexico or Canada or whatever else, to have post-manifesto and even some post-Second Manifesto plural marriages. I think that pretty much stopped with Heber J. Grant, with his administration. So I'm not aware of anything. Are you?
The only.
Oh, and I never asked. The question was, has that continued? Have church presidents continued to the present to give permission for people to secretly marry plurally? Yeah.
Only in the if one wife dies and then they marry another wife in the temple.
Yeah.
That's the only way for them.
Yeah, it's, if they're sealed to more than one wife in the temple, but the first wife is dead. So, is that really plural marriage? So, yes.
Kind of a related question to that. What's the range of how the groups deal with divorce, second marriages after divorce or death? Is there kind of like a gold standard for how they understand it in the celestial kingdom, or is there a lot of diversity in the policies?
Across the board, I'd say every case is different.
The question was what among the different fundamentalist groups, how do they handle divorce or second marriages, et cetera, you know, kind of the messiness of everyday life. And your answer was?
My answer is that, to my knowledge, it's handled on a case-by-case basis. There's no across the board, this is the way it absolutely is.
Right, and you know, and I can say, at least for those who are dead, since that's what I deal with in my job, when we have people who come in and say, this lady was married to 3 different men, who should I seal her to? We always tell them, seal her to all 3, they'll figure it out, and or whatever, you know, so that the sealing goes back and forth. You know, a woman is sealed to more than one husband if she had more than one husband. A man is sealed to more than one wife. Thank you. If they, you know, if he had more than one wife, and we're not talking plurally here, monogamously. So that's how the church is handling that now, with the idea of they'll figure it out. Yes.
In Matt Harris's compilation of the book called Thunder from the Right, the woman who wrote the last essay in there, can't remember her name, she's at BYU, Idaho.
That was Andrea, I think, Andrea Radke Moss.
She has in there, and she even told me at Mormon History who gave her this information, and I can't remember. But anyway, that Ezra Taft Benson in the 1950s, that he and Flora Ann, his wife, went to the temple, and he took another wife that was dead, that was a relative of his, that, you know, that he felt real good about, and she even acted as proxy. So we can't really say that it's always only been that when somebody's done it.
Right, but the woman was dead.
Yes,
Yeah,
she was. But
so-
the interesting thing is his wife was not dead.
Right. Okay, so it was mentioned that Andrea Radke Moss, in her essay, which appeared in Matt Harris's Thunder from the Right, dealing with Ezra Taft Benson, that in the 1950s, Benson and his wife Flora went into the temple, and he was sealed to a woman who was deceased, with Flora acting, you know, being acting in her place. So Flora wasn't dead. Ezra Taft Benson wasn't dead, but he was sealed to a woman who was deceased. And yeah, I beyond having read that myself, I don't know any more on that. And I don't know how much that has gone on. I would say I'm sure he wasn't alone, but I don't know how many have done that.
I can give you one example of my own grandmother. She was married 4 times, 3 times in plural marriage. Her first husband, my great-grandfather, died when he was very young, and she left her widowed with 2 small children. And then she married again, and she was eventually released from him, married plurally again in a very unhappy plural marriage. And the family story is that she was either asking for a release or had gotten one shortly before the second husband was killed in a car accident, and then finally married again, and in a very, very happy plural marriage. And she was instructed that the man that had the best claim on her would get her in the hereafter. So there you have it.
Have you any idea, and I know this is approximate, about the percentage of the people, excluding FLDS, but in the other groups and maybe independents, have actually lived and practiced plural marriage? I realize most of them, if not all, believe in it as a principle and true, but do you have any idea amongst the groups about how many adults actually practice it?
The question was, do we have any idea among the various groups of how many people actually are living plural marriage?
Like 50%?
Yeah, what is the percentage of how many who are living plural marriage? I have no idea, do you?
I have an idea that you would never get a straight answer with that question.
That's why I asked that.
My sense is that in the old days, Colorado City would have a lot more plural marriages because of arranged marriages.
That's why I excluded them.
But in other groups where agency is more of a consideration, you're going to have fewer, but probably ones that last longer or fewer breakups because of the element of agency. So it's hard to say, and there's a deliberate not knowing.
Thanks.
I think that's it. Let's give him a hand.